dear participants, welcome to WAIPA webinar in cooperation with Huawei with the title Optimize Investment Conditions to Accelerate Digital Recovery. I guess the topic is more than relevant for these difficult times. One major topic I would say today is digitalization and how the investment conditions can favor, but not only digitalization, but also how digitalization as tool can help the recovery in a post-COVID-19 era. In fact, our colleagues from World Economic Forum wrote a really interesting article, how digital investment can help COVID-19 recovery. You can find it also in WAIPA's webpage under the blog section. It's really an interesting piece to read. And I took it for the introduction, one takeaway from this article, for the governments to drive economic recovery after the pandemic, supporting digital competitiveness will really be the key. And as such, in this webinar, we are going to have a look at why multilateral collaboration is important. And we'll also have a look at some investment rules. As governments are currently pretty much occupied heavily with this COVID, I guess this is also a good chance for them to prepare for a post-COVID time. And as well, of course, we will look at the role of businesses, which are one of the crucial stakeholders as our main clients, investment promotion agencies and international organizations to get a full picture of the story in the next hour or so. For this, I'm really glad to introduce our excellent line of speakers. We are still missing one, which has some issues with connection, but hopefully we cross the fingers that we'll be able to connect. So we have Mr. Fahad Al Gergawi, which is president of World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies, WAIPA, and also CEO of Dubai FDI. We have Ms. Prerna Soni, Senior Assistant Vice President from Invest India, also our distinguished steering committee member. Then we have Mr. Juan Marchetti, a counselor from World Trade Organization. Then we have Andreas Dressler, Managing Director from FDI Center and one of the practitioners from the investment field. And then our dear colleague who is trying to connect, Craig Burchell, Vice President Global Trade from Huawei. So welcome all. I will give a short, let's say, housekeeping, how the webinar will go. We will first give the word to all our panelists to give a very short introduction, let's say with a couple of sentences, how they see this topic that will be discussed today, and what kind of guidelines, I mean, from the beginning of the webinar, they would like to give. And later on, I will try to moderate the discussion and we'll have some questions to our panelists. Of course, we would like to get different aspects from their angles, how they see this situation and how they can contribute to our audience, to you dear participants. And then we will make a fruitful discussion and having it in a benefit of all audience. And later at the end, we will also, you can share the questions under the questions section. And then I will pick up the most, let's say, rated questions and I will then ask to our dear panelists. So I'm also welcoming our dear colleague, Craig, from the Huawei. Craig, do you hear us?
I hear you. I hope you can hear me. We had a little technical problem there, a gremlin.
Yes. So the topic is obviously good. It's about digitalization. So I'm sure together we can manage. So welcome. I just gave brief introduction. So more or less you are aware of it. So I will simply go to the panelists. So each one of you, maybe Juan, you could be the first to shortly give an introduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Boscan, and good afternoon, morning or evening to all. Very briefly, we think investment will be crucial for the recovery post-COVID. And of course, in that regard, investment facilitation policies and measures will be more important than ever to mobilize those investment flows. And in that regard, as you know, there is a large number of WTO members who are embarked in negotiations to get a multilateral framework on investment facilitation that would provide a framework, but also would foster and contribute to investment facilitation worldwide. So this is basically, and of course, these members are persuaded that this framework could greatly contribute to national domestic policies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juan. Then we can go to Fahad. Fahad, please, floor is yours.
Yes, hello everyone. Glad to be here for the first time with our audience and the members of WAIPA, as well as all the other audiences watching us right now. WAIPA is looking at, of course, serving its members, but also actively contributing to the global investment scene, where we are seeing different climate. It's different presidency for me, but when we come to this part, but we think there is a lot of value of looking at right now that there is the IPAs has a lot on their shoulders for their governments to really act and work into solving part of the disruption we're seeing in the economies, part of the loss of many jobs around the world right now, and at the same time being active to bring back the the overall environment to attract investors in the very, very near future possible. And we are working hand in hand with our IPAs, trying to identify areas of opportunities, signals, market signals that are there. Of course, no final countdown is still there, but we are trying to put something together for everyone to benefit from, and IPAs will be in the heart of the comeback. Thank you.
Thank you, Fahad. Now, Prerna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. For the benefit of everybody, my name is Prerna Soni. I represent the organization called Invest India. We are the National Investment Promotion and Facilitation Agency of the country. I think it was in March, around 20th March, when India went into a full COVID situation and the infection really spread in the country. As an investment promotion agency, our work since then has been to immunize all of our businesses. As Invest India, we work with over 500 investors who are right now looking to invest over $180 billion in the country. And all we have done ever since is to come up with ways to support all these investors, and in ways, be it digital or other, support them to continue with their businesses and make sure that all the concerns that these businesses face are sort of minimized in the country.
Thank you so much, Prerna. Craig, up to you. From the business point of view, a short message for the beginning to start to warm up. Thank you. Can you unmute yourself, Craig, please?
That's better. Thank you, Bastian. It's been quite a while preparing this. I'm very happy to be here. Quick introduction, I'm a lawyer and I've spent 30 years in trade lawyer in the technology sector with Philips Electronics and Samsung and Korea. So I've seen over the last 30 years many waves of trade and investment. And I'm convinced that multilateral cooperation is the way forward. I think this year is going to be marked by COVID and recession, of course, but I think history will remember it for how we mobilize ourselves and how we deal with the situation and how we create our future together. So I'm very much in favor of global cooperation. Quick point on Huawei. I should say that Huawei this year marks 20 years of investment in Europe. And Huawei views inward investment very much as a partnership, a win-win partnership, which creates jobs and stimulates the local ecosystem and businesses and contributes tax. So it is something where Huawei becomes an integral part of the local ecosystem. I think sound recovery clearly needs investment conditions to be optimal. And I think the benefits of ICT are there for everyone to see, because ICT is an enabler of so many other sectors in the economy. And we've seen plenty of examples of how ICT technology has contributed to both detecting and healing and social distancing and remote working. All of these have contributed to reducing some of the impact of COVID, though of course it's a global tragedy. So I think ICT digitalization is well placed. I think public-private partnership and collaboration is important. And I think that the reason I'm here is to share my experiences from the corporate business sector and from a lawyer's perspective. So I look forward very much to the conversation. Thank you, boss.
Thank you very much, Craig. And Andreas, please, from your point of view, like a short introduction, you work a lot with different stakeholders, so would be glad to hear what's your view on this. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Bastian. Well, we're obviously at a critical time for both foreign direct investment and investment promotion agencies. A lot of things happening at the same time, all really as a result of the same situation, but we're seeing dramatic declines in foreign direct investment globally. We're seeing greater competition for investment, and not necessarily benign competition, but pretty harsh competition, zero-sum game type competition, where some countries are actively trying to take investment from other countries through pretty aggressive measures. We're seeing greater government involvement in the economy for obvious reasons that can be beneficial, but we're also seeing in some cases a return to protectionism. We're seeing policies that favor domestic companies. We're seeing a lot of things that will have an impact on FDI, not necessarily in a positive way. We're also seeing budget cuts, or we will see budget cuts, I'm sure, as governments face fiscal shortfalls and start to see deficits. I think investment promotion agencies will start to see belts tightening, and we'll start to see budgets being cut. So it's a very good time for investment promotion agencies, and I believe most of the attendees here are from IPAs, to start revisiting their strategies and to start to think about how they can face and adapt to these new circumstances. And I certainly think that digitalization and digital technologies will play a big role in that. IPAs are obviously tools and instruments of government economic policy. There's no way around that. But I think IPAs can also step up now and actually be champions for greater multilateralism and also greater cooperation worldwide. And I'm sure these are things we're going to be discussing in this webinar.
Great, thank you so much, Andreas. I guess from all of you, what I hear is cooperation is needed, concerted, let's say, or orchestrated cooperation. All institutions and stakeholders are important. We should work hand in hand to overcome the difficulties. And I'm sure we will hear from all of you some great examples as well, how every one of you from different perspective is dealing with this situation. Fahad, I will go to you first. From your, let's say, really big and vast experience with working with all these different stakeholders, now you are, as I introduced you before, you are, of course, the director and the CEO of the Dubai Agency for Investment Promotion, but as well you are presiding currently WAIPA. And how you see IPAs can support the governments, especially to pursue digitalization, and how this can be used as the most effective to overcome this crisis. Please go ahead.
Yes, I think, see, ICT been there for, we've been crucial for everything we've been doing in our businesses for the last at least 20, 30 years. But digital transformation have helped a lot into, escalating to the next level. And we've been seeing that being part on all type of industries. Now, when we are coming to where we are right now, why we are meeting actually is because of this. But what will happen later is, I think this is where our IPAs should take into consideration, especially with tightening of budgets that Andreas also mentioned. We're seeing this happening in across all levels. It will not be only for IPAs, but for many. IPAs for themselves need to really take the advantage of all these facilitation and the digital utilization of their services to make sure that they're connecting with the right, number one, the internal companies, investors who are already with them, who've been there for a while, and to really connect and support. Number two is utilizing their different possible services, even to the after COVID, with the future possible investment or the investment that will be available by that time. And then to make sure that the utilizing of this digital services that they have and the different means of less travel cuts, budgets and all that will make a smaller budget, but better utilized, so they can bring this to the governments. Governments would look at how can I reduce maybe 50 or 60 or 70, whatever % in their budget. That will be very important to continue performing. Government would need to rely on IPAs, the digital part of their services, the digital connectivity, and the different programs that will come together will help into, while reducing on budgetary issue, but also better utilization of these different services that we will come across in the next few months, and the current services that they don't have, that are really need to be moved to the digital sphere to be better utilized and to be meaningful to all other investors. Investors would need to be connected with the different possible digital platform available. And I think this is the era that we will see changes in who's going to go back to office, or who need to go back to office or doesn't need to go back to office, at least for a while, or sometimes for a few days around the week. This is going to be shifting for the next few months that we will see. But definitely, number one would be our focus on the current investors, the aftercare services to them, to really make sure that we are there with them in this difficult time.
I have a sub question, Fahad. Are the investment conditions or the climate in countries in general, how do you see it globally, ready for this? That let's say we will all go to digitalized world and we will use digital tools, and we need many regulations and all these things. Do you think it's ready, or a government should still adjust?
I think we need to. Digital connectivity is there. What I'm calling for is to increase that. If I have a service that is not linked digitally, I need to link it. If I am there, but I don't see the end of it. Maybe some more is going to come in terms of impact. The number that we saw lately or last time was 40%. I think we're going to go even 50 or 60 in terms of investment impact, and maybe even higher. But no one need to wait until the end of it. You need to take steps internally and steps externally. And most steps internally is about really making sure that what you will do will have an impact on your current investors, and to support the government facilitation program that will come later. This is all part of one thing that we all know about, which is the investment environment and there. There has to be a lot of work around this to make sure that we as IPA can complete this year at least with the basics that we can take with us for the next year to come.
Thank you, Fahad. Prerna, may I ask, for example, we all know that India always has a lot of engineers and the people who are very much, I would say, literate in the digitalization. And why do you see digitalization is important, especially, let's say, for emerging economies or, let's say, developing countries? Can I have your point of view onto this?
Certainly. I think when I talk about this, I talk about it also from the perspective of what an investment promotion agency can do and what is it that emerging economies like India are seeing. For the longest time, what we did as an entity was to promote more and more investment. But I think while we are in this COVID situation, we moved into investment facilitation and investment creation, which is where the answer to your question lies. What is happening, and considering the fact that India has significant amount of technology, we have engineers, it is time to create additional demand, which is what we do by using all of this manpower that we have in the country. We know a lot of nations are coming out with certain sort of a package to support COVID, and India has also done that. However, that takes care of one part of the supply aspect. What needs to be done is to create additional supply, and that additional supply will come in by creating a very, very strong digital base, which will of course come in only by development and usage of the engineers that we're talking about. I think as a nation, India has an innate capability to be able to modify and to be able to adapt to new things very, very quickly. We had a very large drive in India called Digital India, wherein we're looking at getting each and every individual of the country to be digital in some form. So when in 2016 we were talking about Digital India, we said that we want 300 million people who were not banked to have a bank account, which was a drive towards Digital India. Today we're sitting in a very, very different situation, and the fact that we are having a conversation of this sort, the fact that India has been able to come up with a lot of innovations. I'll give you an example. There was a food processing factory in India wherein one of the workers came out with a COVID positive case. They had to stop production, and all of the product that was manufactured in that particular factory was gone to waste because there was no way to use it, considering the positive case. There were certain engineers in that company which came up with one technology to make that entire processing user without any touch. So that is the kind of contribution we see from a lot of our engineers. We see a lot of engineers in India already working on technologies for testing kits. We already see them coming out with ways in which we can get people back to work. So, be it sanitizations or face shields, or even using better technologies to get people to connect better, to talk better. Before we started here, we were talking about which platform should be used to be able to interpret languages, to be able to talk to people. And I think these are the kind of things in which Indian engineers have been contributing significantly as of now. Yes.
It's actually excellent example, and I liked especially saying you saying like creating additional demand and supply. So yes, even if we are used to already the new tools, we should maybe promote them and try to get the users being used to it. Maybe Juan, can you a bit reflect on this multilateral collaboration that you say before is very important, and maybe connecting it to what at WTO you are doing, especially, of course, you mentioned investment facilitation, which we are, I guess, from different points of view, all part of it. And we would like, of course, that this investment facilitation is at one point achieved, and then everyone has an easier job. Maybe if you can elaborate on this a bit. Thank you.
Yes, sure. Thank you. Yes, as you know, there is as I was saying, there is a large number of members now, 101 today, basically discussing, or actually they are embarked on a proper negotiation towards the framework on investment facilitation at the WTO. That, of course, the objective is to have a framework, an agreement that would certainly, as I was saying at the very beginning, would basically provide a framework, an umbrella, but also foster and contribute to the development of investment facilitation policies and measures worldwide or everywhere. Of course, more related to the topic that you were discussing on the actual use of technology, that is already addressed among the elements that members are discussing in the draft framework they are looking at. It concerns, of course, electronic publication of all types of policies, measures, regulations, even the use of technology to eventually supply applications, deal with applications, or even further than that. Of course, there are proposals to have single windows, eventually going even beyond the simple submission and processing of an application electronically. So that is an issue that has already been discussed by the group, and they are still discussing it, and in order to see what shape to give to those proposals. Of course, the group was aiming at having a concrete outcome by the ministerial conference, which was supposed to be held sort of next month. But as you know, this was postponed for obvious reasons until next year. But the objective continues to be the same, to achieve such an outcome, presumably by the next ministerial meeting. Yes.
Thank you. Obviously, we are all under some, let's say, period that we need to kind of readjust our thinking. And obviously, I see also from the intergovernmental organizations that you are all putting lots of attention to change your way, how you work, actually, being more digitalized as well, as you mentioned, digital applications. So obviously, this is the new reality. And I'm glad to hear that also what you mentioned, 101 member already supported investment facilitation, and we as WAIPA as well are actively participating into this because we believe that this would be a good tool for all the countries. Can I go now maybe to Craig? Craig, you as a representative of the business, so you are actually the client. But you are also working actually closely with the, let's say, WTO as a, let's say, part of this discussion group. You currently also made a paper, investment policy priorities for digital economy, where you also speak about how, for example, all institutions and all the stakeholders should work together, how should they collaborate, how they should be multilateral instead of unilateral. Maybe you can give some examples of Huawei you mentioned before, especially when you are investing to Europe. How do you integrate into local ecosystems? How you are contributing to creating jobs, linking local suppliers, and so on. And reflect as well, it would be good for especially participants from investment promotion agencies, how you as their client see their role, how they can help you, how they can assist you. Are they ready in this new, let's say, digitalized era? Please go ahead, feel free to elaborate on this.
Thank you very much, Bosan. Well, I think as you've given me the opportunity, I think I should put that on the screen. It's a paper that we've worked on over the last few months. And it has three things in it, which I think your members will find interesting. It's in three parts. One, it shares our experiences from the experts we have in Huawei and also from our colleagues around the world in our offices, which are managing local investment. So we wanted to share those suggestions for improving the investment conditions to make them optimal so that we're better prepared for the recovery. And we can also maintain global value change, which are incredibly important to the recovery. The second part is a series of examples that we've collected from France, Germany, Spain, and which exhibits how Huawei's investments in Europe over the last 20 years have integrated by creating lots of R&D facilities. If we take France as an example, there are 5 R&D facilities in France. And in Paris, we have collaborations with 3 of the leading universities in design. In fact, Paris is the global headquarters for Huawei for design, because we think that Paris there is the center of excellence for fashion and design. And so we wanted to tap into that talent. So we have a facility there, which is our global headquarters for design. Then if we look at in Belgium, for example, we've invested very much in the hub for our European R&D. So all of that, all our R&D in Europe is managed from a center which has been established in the Triangle in Leuven, which is in the Brabant high-tech sector. And also we have many cooperations with universities in Germany, France, and the UK, so that we can connect to the, let's say, the innovations that are being created there, and also provide platforms. We've had a number of successes where the innovations created in the UK, for example, have then become worldwide bestsellers, particularly in the domain called the Internet of Things. So the protocols were designed in the UK, and that has brought considerable benefit to the UK, both in terms of the jobs we create directly, but as you'll know from economic studies, it's not only the investor company, but it's the system that grows around it in terms of suppliers, service providers, logistics companies. So all of that goes with it to create a beneficial system. So, and we're very pleased with that. I think I think as you mentioned, new ways of working, I think that we all need to think about new ways of working. I hear quite often now new normal, meaning we have to become adapted, but that's what we're all good at, humans. We need to adapt. But I still think there's a lot of validity in multilateral collaboration. I think if I can just make a point about digitalization that's been raised already by some of our speakers, and connecting the point made earlier about budgets, I think using or going digital and applying digital apps and AI and many of these facilities that are available, this can bring greater efficiencies in the use of the budget, which means we can focus energy on giving support to the investor instead of spending time researching and finding information in many different many different sources. Platforms can create the possibility for a one-stop shop. And now, whilst Huawei, we are a very sophisticated investor, so we know very much and we investigate very deeply. But I think these systems are particularly of support to small and medium-sized enterprises and even micro-enterprises. It's an important point for me that small and medium-sized enterprises should have the support they need. As a big company, we're able to do a lot of this ourselves, and we're very helpful for the support that we have from local investment promotion agencies. But I think most of the growth of jobs in Europe comes from the small and medium-sized enterprises, and also I think that occurs around the world in many different economies. So I think the investment promotion agencies have a very important role to play in supporting making that budget go further. And I think that's what I'll say for now. I'm happy to come back later with some more.
Thank you very much. It's actually good to hear, let's say, an honest opinion from an investor. What we always believe and we advocate that IPAs should speak a business language. And this is why I wanted you to actually elaborate on this. Andreas, you are, let's say, a very active investment practitioner, and you have a vast experience on working with IPAs globally from different roles that you played in your career. Actually, I would like you to, let's say, very directly say about how do you see the role of investment promotion agencies as well. We heard from Craig, they become even more and more important. And how do you see the post-COVID era? I guess there would be a need to readjust, to reshape a bit, maybe even to make a new strategy. And what role does this digitalization, about what we are speaking today, play in your eyes regarding this?
Okay, so yes, there definitely is a need now to revisit strategies in many respects. So not just in relation to digitalization, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So it starts with really evaluating the role of foreign direct investment in your economy. Whether you're a country or a state or a city, there will be less investment to go around. And I think the starting point is really, in the future, what role will FDI play in our economy? Will it continue to be a big contributor? Or should we be focusing on helping domestic companies? Should we be focusing on fostering innovation? So those types of decisions will have to be made. For locations or IPAs that make the decision that, yes, they will continue to pursue FDI, the next question is what type of FDI? Sectors are being affected very differently by this crisis. Sectors will emerge from this crisis in a very changed way. So IPAs are well advised right now to take a look at their target sectors and to really highlight the ones that they think will be resilient and that they think provide a good match to their capabilities. IPAs will need to look at their organizational structure. They'll have to shift resources, partly because of budget cuts, but partly also because of the point that was mentioned earlier, greater emphasis on aftercare, retaining existing investors as opposed to attracting new ones. So there will have to be a reallocation of budgets within agencies. So those are some of the organizational issues. On the operational side, this is where digital technology comes in. It starts all the way from the beginning. How do you find investors? So yes, the traditional way of finding investors, going to trade shows, going on road shows, traveling to meet companies, that will come back, albeit slowly. So this is a good period of time to really consider how to implement tools that have been around for a long time in consumer marketing that help you find investors through digital technology. And those tools already exist, but very few IPAs have implemented them. Bostian, you've seen in our joint trainings some good case studies of agencies that have used those tools. Those tools will become more prevalent. So that's finding investors. The other area, which has already been raised a couple of times by the other panelists, is a digital service provision by IPAs. I spoke to an IPA this morning, I won't mention which one. They've set themselves the goal that 95% of the services they provide investors will be digital soon. In other words, they won't be provided any more face-to-face or in traditional methods of, going through different levels of government bureaucracy. They will have 95% digital service provision. So that's another aspect. It relates to communication. Right now, one of the challenges we're facing in our site selection work when we're advising companies on where to invest is we can't visit the sites. We can't visit pieces of land. We can't conduct face-to-face interviews. We can't conduct on-the-ground due diligence. And some locations are really struggling with that. On the other hand, we've seen locations who've anticipated that and have put in place amazing digital tools to do virtual site visits, to interview people, to do workforce surveys. So again, we're seeing IPAs move at different speeds when it comes to the implementation of these technologies. One last word on that. I don't think this is, and this is to Craig's point, this is almost leveling the playing field, because the digital technologies may cost a little bit initially to implement, but in the medium to long run, they're actually very cost effective, and they can help IPAs make much better use of their resources, and they can be implemented everywhere. They can be implemented anywhere in the world, and they are a great way for IPAs from around the world to really up their game and level the playing field in terms of quality and effectiveness.
Can I have a sub question? You mentioned especially the site visits, the let's say locations. We all know that greenfield is an important, let's say, source of investment, for indirect investment. And of course, for this, the investor needs to be there. They need to see with their own eyes the location, the infrastructure and everything. Would you mention these virtual presentations of, let's say, locations? Would this be sufficient? And you mentioned now 95. I'm sure this is, of course, one IPA that says 95% they would use digital services. Would this become, let's say, in more than half of the cases of IPAs, that they would simply use digitalization, or they would still tend to pursue the physical visits?
I think the 95% says it all. Digitalization, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Craig, but can never fully substitute for the personal aspect. So I'm sure all of us here today would much rather be sitting on a podium next to one another, and I'm sure a lot of the audience would rather be sitting with us and coming up to us after the panel discussion to have a chat. So the same goes for digital service provision, the same goes for corporate site selection decisions. There's a lot you can do virtually. You can visit buildings, you can have 3D rendering of sites, you can have online interviews with universities, potential business partners, potential suppliers, but there's still that final 5% element of gut feel. Do I feel comfortable in this location? Do I trust my counterparts in this location? Is this a place that I want to set up a business? And that 5% or 10%, whatever the exact number is, will continue to exist and will still play a very big role. But it's really getting the, the digital part in place so that you're not fully dependent on that personal aspect, because that is going to continue to be challenging.
Very much. I will go to Prerna. Craig has a short intervention. Okay, the replica. Please, Craig, and then up to Prerna.
Yeah.
Just a very short, I wanted to pick up the point that Andreas made, because the examples that you give are really excellent. And I think in the future, this is an example of how technology and face-to-face will develop in the future. I don't believe that we will go to a world where everything becomes virtual. I think that we will, as humans, we will learn to interact more and more with machines and use the benefits of digital technology. And that's a good example of where that could save budget, for example, in the preparations by giving a virtual site visit. So I think those examples are very good. But I also just wanted to make a quick point about an investment in bilateral connectivity. The OECD has done some work where they've shown that a 10% increase in bilateral connectivity with good infrastructure will deliver a 2% increase in goods trade between countries and up to 3% in the services trade between those countries. So it is a point in question that the investment in digitalization, in good ICT infrastructure, good communications networks is an enabler which will enable the SMEs to create the prosperity. And I think the figures there indicate that the investment in ICT is something that, yes, it's needed up front, but exactly as Andreas says, this is an investment over the long term. And I think it's important to take a long-term view. If the digital infrastructure is good, then the SMEs and all the entrepreneurs in the countries around the world, you are freeing them up to release their energy towards creating prosperity. So it's an important enabler. Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you, Craig. Prerna, can you brief us a bit more actually about how you really quickly responded with your COVID, this immunity platform actually? I guess this is a good example of how IPA can really use digital tools to react into some shock, if I may call the shock of this COVID-19 crisis. Maybe you can elaborate and then connect how the businesses responded, especially the existing investors, because I'm sure everyone would agree that we are all focusing currently on the existing investors, trying to make them ease of their jobs, their struggles, and then how they would, let's say, continue being in your country, maybe even expand later. This would be, I'm sure, the big portion of the investments would come from the existing investors. So maybe you can elaborate through your platform what you did.
Certainly. So what I will do is I will actually classify our work as Invest India into 3 parts now. So all this while we've been talking about investment promotion and investment facilitation, which is aftercare. I think to a great extent, the facilitation piece is something that took precedence when we went into the COVID situation, which is when we launched the business immunity platform. What we did was we came up with a way to help any investor who is already investing in India. We reached out to all our investors, telling them that we're here to help with any issues that they might be facing. And most of the issues that came to us were related to supply chain, immunity of the business, be it due to lockdown and the fact that they were businesses that were manufacturing essentials which were needed in the country. We also went out to a lot of companies to understand their initiatives, so that the whole country could learn from them. Other businesses could learn from all of these entities in the country, from outside the country or domestic investors who were making sure that their employees are not let go. We were trying to support employees who had to move during this period wherein there was a nationwide lockdown. In fact, we got more than 8,100 queries from investors all and beyond, and we were able to facilitate 7,600 of them. What we also did is we reached out to more than 2,400 global and domestic stakeholders. We reached out to our partners, to embassies, to high commissions all over, to let them know that we are here to help. At one point in time, nobody was helping even expats understand the kind of situation or how is it that they can move during lockdown. We were here as a partner to help them through that entire process. There's another very interesting thing about what we did on that business immunity platform, and that was to talk about supplier solutions. So, talking about the fact in India right now has 100,000 COVID cases. When we started off in March, we were certainly a significantly lower number, but we knew at that point in time that we will need ventilators, PPE kits, testing kits and whatnot for all our health workers, non-health workers, hospitals, considering the kind of cases that are going to come up in the country. Considering the fact that investment promotion agencies sit in a very unique position, we understand the domestic market really well, we understand the international market well, we know the government and the thought process well. We reached out to more than 1,400 companies domestically and internationally, be it traders, importers or manufacturers, to be able to source all of these products to make India COVID ready. We also did certain very, very unthinkable things. For example, of course, when we were talking about movement of supply chain, we needed to get our private logistic companies together. And that is again where we got technology in. So while all of this work that I spoke about, we've been doing without physically being present in office, considering there was a total lockdown, we were available. And what we also did for the supply chain was we got more than 457 logistic companies, the government of India, all of them together on one simple WhatsApp group. We were able to resolve all supply related queries just by posting it on a group and having logistic companies in the country volunteer to be able to support. To give you an example, there was one of our customers, I should not call it customer, but an Indian manufacturer of testing kits needed certain crucial enzymes to move in from Singapore. We were able to help them to get all of this transferred to the country overnight with the help of this logistics platform. I want to take 2 more minutes here to talk about what next. So, we've spoken about what we did with the business immunity platform and how we worked on investment facilitation per se and going beyond the role of a traditional IPA. I think today is a time when IPAs need to look at investment creation. Gone are the days when we just go out and promote our country as the next best investment destination. I know a lot of panelists have spoken about the fact that there are certain sectors which would work, which would not work in a post-COVID scenario. And this is the time when we identify ways to make those struggling sectors actually come out as winners as well in the post-COVID scenario. So while technology, data centers, healthcare, pharma will get a lot of investments, and as an IPA, we're working with the government to make sure that we have the right kind of policies and the right kind of reforms come in place for these sectors. It is very important to work on sectors like tourism, on auto. It is important to work on these aspects on both sides. And here I want to come back to the comment that I made earlier on creation of demand. So, as an investment promotion agency, while we would go out and tell people that, for example, the auto sector in India would have these reforms that the government has done, and these are the new government policies because of which you should come and invest, We are also right now working with the government to come up with certain tax holidays for consumers, to come up with certain online shopping festivals across the nation. We have to create demand using digital presence that we have all over the country to be able to see that the economy starts churning again. We also have to start looking at more and more innovation. I think as an IPA, when we go out at one point in time, we were looking at very classic sectors and traditional sectors to attract investments. Today is the day when if somebody is manufacturing a shoe, this is the time when Industry 4.0 has to come into all countries, wherein if we have to have employment, but in addition, we have to have a non-touch technology to be able to manufacture. Those are the kind of innovations that IPAs really need to go out and work on. I think it's very interesting what Andreas had said earlier. Of course, there is a move towards protectionism that might come in a lot of countries. We've seen EU change its FDI rules. We saw Australia in March change its FDI rules to make it a government approval requirement to become a requirement for FDI coming in. What is very important to understand that there is a difference between being a protectionist country and a self-dependent country. The kind of fear that a lot of nations saw and the way forward is such that they want to be self-dependent in a lot of ways. And that is where investment promotion agencies can play a very, very significant role, because that is where we get our own entities, our own SMEs and domestic along with international players to one, see the kind of demand and have the right policies to be able to protect them with what we might see in the future.
Thank you very much, Prerna. It was really insightful, actually, especially to hear from the practice of the IP. Andreas, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, just a very quick comment about Prerna's remark on demand creation. I think that's an amazing example, excellent example of how IPAs can actually use the situation to elevate their standing and move beyond, as Prerna said, just investment promotion or attraction, and to play a broader role in economic recovery. And in doing that, really to continue to demonstrate their value, their relevance, and why they're needed. And that is really something that I would urge, and I know WAIPA is doing the same thing, urge all IPAs to do, is to think of ways to elevate your role and to think of how you can use that type of advocacy function to continue to play an active role in economic recovery. So thank you, Prerna, for those examples.
Thank you.
Can't agree more, Andreas. And Juan, I was just about to give the word to you. Maybe you as an, let's say, intergovernmental institution, how do you see your role, especially from this regulation side? You know, we heard a lot about FDI screening, especially within Europe. Can you elaborate on this a bit, or also anything that your other colleagues said now?
Thank you, Bastian. Yes, I wanted to basically add and react to a few things that, many things that have been said, but they are all very pertinent for the work that this group of WTO members is carrying out at the WTO. As you know, of course, the WTO has been following these developments both on the trade side and the investment side from the very beginning. And all of these, in our view, reinforces the need to more than ever probably to keep these investment policies transparent. And it reinforces the case for further transparency of policies of what countries are doing in order sometimes to attract, sometimes to protect domestic sectors. And this is one of certainly major focus of the investment facilitation framework that WTO members are dealing with in the WTO. The second point I wanted to make is that, and it relates very much to the points raised by Prerna, is how important investment facilitation has become. True investment facilitation, that is to say, as basically it is understood in the WTO, in the sense we are not talking about market access per se or investment protection, but how you facilitate the life and the projects of current investors and prospective investors. And that is precisely a very important point. Of course, I relate also to what Andreas has just said. We have to be aware of and wary of protectionist pressures that may go beyond simply ensuring self-reliance, as Prerna said, but which can become really problematic, not only for investors, but for the countries themselves. And my final point would be that, you know, in this idea that was mentioned about being creative with regard to initiatives, how technology should be used, how to expand investment in digital infrastructure, and basically help less advanced economies or developing and least developed economies also to participate and profit from investments. I think it is important, and it would be great if, of course, IPAs have a great role to play here to contribute, and also, of course, the practitioners and investors they have a role to play in terms of providing WTO members involved in this initiative with ammunition, with ideas, with proposals to keep the discussion updated and to get finally a framework that will respond and will reflect the tendencies regarding investment facilitation policies and measures. So that would be, I think you could do a great contribution to the discussion intellectually and supporting basically the development of the discussion, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. As you know, Fahad, I'll give you the word. I saw your indication. We are trying to be as active as possible and also mobilizing our vast member network to support investment facilitation, let's say, negotiations now. We also worked on some paper together with World Economic Forum to be able to give direct, let's say, from the IPA perspective, so very practical ideas what should be in the agenda of investment facilitation, as you just spoke. So very practical things that would really help to all the community to act on it. Fahad, I will give, we are coming to close to the end. I will give you as a, let's say, also from the WAIPA point of view, maybe if you can elaborate, or if you can jump on the other, of course, what we heard now as well, but as well as what as WAIPA, we could, for example, also, we are not intergovernmental, but we are an NGO that works together with public agencies mostly, how we can actually, as a thought leader, participate into these discussions and how we can, let's say, boost again this FDI flows into the economies. Please go ahead, floor is yours.
Yes, I would like to mix few things that came to where we are right now. As WAIPA and as an IPA on Dubai level, and then there is the different excellent, you know, examples that came from India and many other countries that we hear from. What we try to maximize today is the different experiences available. And we know that not all countries can take the same example because of the different, you know, circumstances or investment climate they have. But one thing that is very important, and especially for us in WAIPA, that we started the least developed countries training, you know, initiative. And this is something that through Hamdan Center for the Future of Investment with also with WAIPA, to really bring this to a place where countries, at least the least developed countries, to really can see and develop their capacity development, capacity, and at the same time get exposed to many different possible scenarios. Coming back to where we are today, I think we need to focus on, while we will talk to investment facilitation, while we will talk to different, you know, stakeholders, especially the aftercare services here, but possibly in very soon also started going back to the outside world of investors. We have to make sure that there is a huge gap that we will have in terms of unemployment globally. And this unemployment of companies got affected on many different countries and regions around the world. So the key for the investment facilitation would be for, I think, the investment facilitation for sustainable development. This is where making SDG bankable into projects. This is where I think also we need to focus on society elements. The impact of the eye for itself is an economic, social and environmental. I think this element of social will be the focus for the next at least 2 to 3 years. We need to make sure that investments are not there on financial components only, but they would come with projects that will make sure to give job opportunities to maximum number of employees in different locations. What we are saying as well with the tracing of 15 before COVID, there was a tracing of 15 trillion US dollar of SDG related opportunities until 2030. That was part of the UNCTAD number that was in their estimate. Maybe this number will get affected, but we need to focus that whatever investment is going to come, that will have a really an investment for prosperity that has a lot of value for societies, as well as, of course, for investors themselves. So we need to maximize that. We have an investment that is SDG related, that has a risk, return, and impact element as well.
Thank you very much, Fahad. I guess you raised a very good point, actually. It's not only and I will ask later Craig if he agrees on it. So not only to maximize the profit, but also to make a great impact onto social and also environmental, let's say, circumstances because of the investment. So I guess the social component will become even more effective than maybe economic part. So Craig, maybe you as an investor, would you agree on what you heard, especially from the colleagues from investment promotion agencies, or Andreas, who elaborated a bit on it? You as an investor, are you satisfied with it? How do you see this, for example, in the future? How you will react? What will be your next steps, let's say, especially now you can't travel, you can't go and check the locations. Can you elaborate on this? And then briefly, and later I'll try to see if there are any questions from the audience that I can ask, and then we will wrap up the webinar. Please, Craig, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I want to pick up first very briefly on a point. I was very impressed by Prerna's point about generating demand, and I think that's a really good thing that IPAs can think about. And I think that fits very neatly into what Fahad just said about new areas, climate change, healthcare, sustainable investments, carbon neutral investments. I think these are new types, and I believe that there will be this shift towards more societal benefits which come out of the investment. I think FDI is classically either acquisitional investment, where an external investor comes in and buys a company and runs away, or it's an integrational investment where it's a win-win partnership. And I think the IPAs need to take a long-term view on the investor, and for the country concerned, even to check themselves, is this an investment that I can honestly report to my minister and say, this is going to be good for my country over the long term, because it's going to benefit from carbon neutral investment, or it's an investment in healthcare. And on that point quickly, so I do agree with that point. I would like to add that in respect of COVID and technology, we've received a great many requests from all over the world to understand how technology has been applied to minimize the impacts of COVID. And there are three distinct areas. One is the sort of track and trace, where simple IT technology can check people at 200 people a minute, at airports and mass transit. Or there's the examples of CT scans with AI, which can cut the diagnosis of COVID from 14 minutes down to just 10 seconds, which is then verified by a doctor who then spends 2 minutes putting it into his head. So there are many examples of technology being used in the healthcare sector, and I'm sure there will be more and more demand for that. So I would encourage IPAs to consider to think more about the demands for their countries. And I think the demands are going to change. I think we will see more investment in green technologies, carbon neutral technologies, and certainly in healthcare and more sustainable. And I think just one last point. I mean, we've heard people say, well, foreign direct investment is going to take a hit. And I know the reports that have been produced at UNCTAD, for example, they show the impact very different on many different sectors. ICT investment is supposed to go down by only 2 or 3%, whereas hospitality is going to take a dive 30 to 40%. But I'm very much of the sort that likes to create the future. Don't let it happen to you. And I would like to see concrete steps come. I think it's time for world leaders such as those at the G7 to come up with a facility or a funding facility to provide the facility which is necessary to drive continued investment, and that investment should drive recovery and should drive investment in infrastructure, because that's what we all need. And I think I would like to see action from the leaders in G7 to create that facility when they meet in July. That's a personal view, because I think that is a way of, instead of predicting a decline in FDI, I'm in favor of let's take charge of this issue and try to reverse that trend and try to do something to make it better. So I think investment agencies have a role there to talk to their governments about the type of investment that needs to be attracted and how that contributes to recovery. Because we're all in this together, and I think a united approach is much better than a unilateral one. Sorry, I went on just a little bit. Finally, if people are interested in COVID and technology, there's quite a bit on the website, huawei.com.
And I'm sure, Craig, the people later on, if they would ask, they can get as well your paper that you produced, and I'm sure they can get some good insights as well from there, especially to see what is the business point of view. Would you say that when you are investing, last point, and also there it's also from the audience, for example, do you have any special, let's say, plans in the future for investment into the, let's say, lesser or least developed countries? There was a question from the, let's say, for Africa. We all know that these least developed countries as well are having more struggling sometimes, although we heard in the beginning in our chat that sometimes they are responding better than developed ones, especially regarding technologies. But still, do you feel that you put any special focus on this kind of less developed economies to help them, especially since you are a technological company? Shortly, briefly, because we are coming to the end.
Yeah, there's a quick, simple answer to that. I think I can't answer generally, but I think if any of those questioners would like to make contact with the local Huawei office, and we're represented in many countries around the world, they will know how that they can help. So I encourage your IPAs to just knock on the door, make contact with the local Huawei office, and they'll be able to tell you how they can help.
I have a general question, which any one of you can jump from the audience. Digitalization and use of IT platforms is the way forward. But then there is also a challenge to create more jobs, as many people are going to be out of jobs. How do you create a balance? So any thoughts on this from the panelists? Whoever wants to jump into it.
Yes, Bastian, if I may, I just mentioned that it's the focus of which countries, and at the same time with investors. What type of projects that I would like to introduce and focus on, and this is an IPA, again, work that I need to, as an IPA, I need to present to investors. Areas with significant impact on social elements. This is where that I can bring a little bit back some of the lost job, definitely not all. And at the same time, make sure that those impacts on the economy would be the highest possible. So if I have a list of 20 projects in my portfolio that I wanted before COVID to really push, I will focus on these projects that has such impact, especially on a time of really difficulties. So the more impact I have on FDI, the more economic, gains going to be higher, as well as social. This is, I think, the first thing that would come to my mind, and we would look into that definitely to make sure that whatever companies are or employees are and families even affected, we at least can make a little bit of that effect for a better use.
Go ahead, Prerna. Sorry, I was muted. Yeah.
Thank you. I totally agree with Fahad. I think in a lot of cases, this is going to be a balancing act. So there are certain sectors wherein you would have more influx of Industry 4.0, more use of technology. However, there are still going to be sectors which are very labor intensive. While they would see certain amount of reduction currently considering COVID, however, sectors like footwear, leather, manufacturing of textiles, all of these sectors would require labor eventually. And I think as a country, what we are trying to do, and which would work in a lot of emerging markets as well, is that for now, try and get your employees to continue to be on the payroll so that they get at least certain minimum payment. You could have a concept like UBI of $1,200 that the US is giving to keep them afloat till the time manufacturing comes back, and then move it to all those sectors again. I think in a lot of ways, COVID has been some sort of a preponement of tech enablement across sectors that we were seeing to happen across the world as is. I think it's just something that we were not prepared for. We would have gradually moved into usage of tech as much as we are now. However, as a lot of us have mentioned earlier, as human beings, I think we can adapt really quickly. It would be a lot about creating that balance so that employment is not as drastically impacted as one would predict.
I guess I got your message that we should always be positive, of course, and we should take this as an opportunity to develop ourselves, to develop our technological skills and other skills to cope with the issue. Juan, there is some question, if you can elaborate a bit on your platform within WTO. The one participant asked, actually, if you can shortly, briefly.
Yes, sure. I mean, the initiative, I suppose you mean by platform, you mean the current discussions on the framework.
Yes, and how they can contribute, for example, especially practitioners. And I'm glad to say that now we are working for the last 2 years with WTO. I'm also glad that always I see the willingness to have the businesses in the discussion as well, and other, let's say, stakeholders, which was not the case many years ago, which we do appreciate. So how they can contribute? Yeah, please.
I mean, yeah, briefly. I mean, when it comes to, of course, there are basically two ways. One is, of course, directly through their own governments, particularly if the governments are, of course, participating in the initiative. The more, the better. But otherwise, of course, as you said, Boschen, we are very glad to have to benefit from contributions by private sector, but also by WAIPA, ITC, International Trade Center, the WEF, the German Development Institute. So they hold periodic monthly sort of workshops on investment facilitation. They produce, of course, documents, discussion pieces. Then, of course, the question is how to feed that into the discussions. That has to be done through basically the members participating in the discussions. But certainly we profit a lot from those contributions, and we interact a lot, as you know, Boschen, with WAIPA, ITC, WEF, etc. On the things they do. Of course, before COVID, though many of those workshops were held in the WTO in Geneva, and of course, negotiators and delegates were all invited and participated in discussions, so they learned firsthand from the practitioners. But that, of course, can continue and should continue, probably for the time being through virtual means, and this is what is going on. This is how it is being done now. Yes.
Thank you so much. So we are actually out of time. Maybe if anyone, each of you, one sentence or two sentences, like a key message, takeaway message. Craig already raised the hand, so I'll start with Craig and then all the others. And then I will just wrap up with a couple of your messages that I took from you, but I would like to hear what you have as a, let's say, final message of the webinar. Please, Craig, go ahead.
I think the point I'd like to make is pick up on Andreas made the point about leveling of the playing field. I think there are enormous possibilities now for IPAs to spot new ways to attract investment, and also new areas where investment will come. So there's an opportunity there, and I think digitalization is going to be a leveling of the playing field for many economies. Access to good digital infrastructure is the way to enable your economies to recover. Thank you, boss.
Thank you very much, Craig. So let's go to Prerna.
Thank you. I think as a nation, as the world, we're right now trying to recover from the impact that COVID has had on the economy, and using of digitization and all of technology will only help us accelerate that recovery. And hopefully we will be having this session again in a few months and we'll be sitting across each other.
Thank you very much. Andreas?
Sure. I would just encourage all of the investment promotion agencies that are listening in to really use this opportunity. It may not seem like a great opportunity at first glance, but it is a window of time that you can use to reconsider how you do things, to really step up your game, and to change the way investment promotion agencies work and how investment attraction works worldwide. So please take that into consideration and use this moment in time.
Thank you, Andreas. Fahad, your final message for the audience?
Yes, I think the changes are, we know the changes is so rapid, but we know that we have so many areas that we can cover that we didn't think of maybe in the past because of what we were working for as IPAs is just to really achieve. I think it's time to reflect, as Andreas mentioned, to reflect on what extra services we can bring on the table, how we can bring up our different, muscles and brains, of course. But there are so many programs that we've been introduced to in the last 3 months. There are so many different market signals that we are getting. What we use, how we use them, how we bring them to be, meaningful to our businesses, to our day-to-day work, as well as to our government, to see that there are a lot of market signals that we can tap on and make better policies and continue to develop that policy and the environment and the framework that we always address investment from. There is no one solution, but keep looking at the market signals around you and make use of them, and come back again to WAIPA meetings, because this is where we are there for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fahad. And Juan, your last message, and then I'll wrap up the webinar.
Thank you, Boshem. Very briefly, I would like to stress the importance of multilateral cooperation on investment and on investment facilitation in particular. I think these are certainly challenging times for all countries, all governments, investors, etc. But I would like to stress the importance of cooperation, and of course, as you know, many WTO members think that can be done at the WTO. Many others are thinking, of course, are also welcoming the idea. So just wanted to make a plea for continuous multilateral cooperation in these very challenging times. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juan. I would like to thank you, all of you speakers. Actually, it was a great webinar, according to my personal opinion. We raised a lot of important questions. We are all aware that the times are not easy, but I can feel the positive energy, especially getting the information from the different stakeholders. We had today with us, so company perspective, IPA perspective, we have, let's say, intergovernmental perspective, and we had somebody from the investment field as an advisor. And I will like to share a couple of messages that came to my mind. So what will be the role of FDI in the future? How important will be the FDI in the future? How important will be, let's say, multilateral versus unilateral approaches? Cooperation, and cooperation, partnerships, inclusion of different opinion, Industry 4.0 to be in a forefront, IPAs to be in the forefront, international institutions to be in forefront, WAIPA to be there for you, IPAs to help you, to assist you, to assist to your governments to be able to give you enough empowerment that you will be able to serve investors in an appropriate manner. And of course, a task for all of IPAs and different stakeholders is to prepare SDG bankable projects. So the investment will go into the sectors that will the best possible benefit to the host economies, and it will have impact not only on the profitable side, but also on the social and environmental aspect. And with these words, I would like to thank to all speakers once more. I would like to take especially to Huawei as a co-host of this webinar. And I would like to thank to all who participated to this webinar and also who raised some very relevant questions. And please, as our president said, please do follow us, do follow our webpage. You have a lot of best practices there, what IPAs are doing currently in the COVID era. And there are many papers that we prepared, especially the paper of the, let's say, responses of IPAs to the COVID, where we give certain recommendations to investment promotion agencies, what they should do in the future, how they should react, how they should shape their strategies, their actions, their approach, how they should digitalize themselves to be able to serve to the, let's say, challenging times. So thank you again for all, and please follow us in all our social media and follow us in some other webinars that we are preparing for the future. Thank you so much and have a good day and stay healthy and safe. Thank you.